A hidden truth laid beneath the surface of a man's seemingly ordinary life, allowing him to evade justice for nearly 40 years. A series of horrific crimes in 2 states remain unsolved for decades, leaving unanswered questions to the victims and their families. The man behind the shocking kidnappings and assaults were finally identified after decades after groundbreaking forensic techniques finally brought his dark secrets to light, ending a long and painful journey toward justice. On July 6, 1986, officers with the Phoenix Police Department responded to a report of a kidnapping near 10th Street and Coral Gables Drive in Phoenix, Arizona. The parents of the victim, shaken and distraught, told the officers that they had awoken that morning to find their home burglarized. To their horror, they also realized that their daughter was missing. A search ensued involving neighbors and law enforcement, creating a sense of urgency and dread that gripped the entire neighborhood. Thankfully, the missing child was discovered soon after the report, having been found by neighbors and safely returned home. The relief of the family was palpable, yet questions remained about the circumstances surrounding the incident. Despite the quick resolution in finding the child, the case left investigators puzzled. Extensive efforts to identify the perpetrator failed to produce any leads. Officers scoured the home for evidence, conducted interviews with neighbors, and followed up on every tip that came in. However, no suspects were identified, leaving the case unsolved. The Phoenix Police Department eventually reached a standstill, with no immediate way to connect the crime to a known offender. Years later, on October 28, 1992, a chillingly similar crime took place in Henderson, Texas. In this case, another little girl was kidnapped and assaulted in circumstances that mirrored the Phoenix incident. As with the previous case, law enforcement dedicated significant resources to solving the crime. Evidence collected at the scene was meticulously processed and entered into CODIS. Despite these efforts, no immediate match to a known individual was found, leaving investigators once again without a suspect. A breakthrough of sorts emerged when forensic analysis linked the DNA evidence from the Henderson case to that of the earlier Phoenix kidnapping. This connection confirmed that the same individual was responsible for both crimes. The DNA profile, though crucial, lacked a corresponding match in the system, leaving law enforcement frustrated by the limitations of the available technology and resources. Nearly 40 years after the crime, a significant breakthrough came in 2024, when Phoenix cold case detectives turned to investigative genetic genealogy. After meticulous work and exhaustive analysis, this advanced method yielded a promising lead that investigators pursued rigorously. Following months of intensive investigation, the suspect was identified as 61-year-old David Mundt. The culmination of decades of tireless efforts and the integration of modern forensic science finally led to the resolution of the long-standing mystery. Investigators from Phoenix and Texas collaborated closely, sharing information and resources to ensure that Mundt was held accountable for his crimes. In August 2024, Mundt was arrested in connection with the kidnapping and assault cases from Phoenix and Henderson. Once the legal process for extradition is completed, Mundt will be transported to Phoenix to face charges related to the 1986 kidnapping and assault. He is currently held on $1 million bail. Authorities in Texas and Arizona are working together to ensure he is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This arrest not only brings a sense of closure to the victims and their families, but also underscores the importance of persistence in cold case investigation. John Blaylock, a hard-working steelworker and devoted father's life, was cut short in his Griffith, Indiana apartment. His case remained unsolved for over 4 decades, until a groundbreaking advancement in DNA technology reignited the search for justice. The nightmarish crime baffled investigators for years, but the relentless pursuit finally uncovered the truth behind this decades-old mystery. John Blaylock, born in 1930, was deeply cherished by his parents, and grew up embodying the values of hard work and dedication. By 1981, at the age of 51, he had become a devoted father and a respected steelworker in the manufacturing and construction industries. On the morning of November 3, 1981, John's co-workers grew concerned when he failed to show up for work, something highly unusual for the dependable steelworker. Acting on their worry, two of his colleagues went to his apartment in Griffith to check on him. What they found inside was a horrifying scene. John's body was discovered in his bedroom, naked from the waist down, and it was immediately clear he had met a violent end. He had been bludgeoned in the back of the head, with investigators later identifying a piece of pottery and possibly an alarm clock as the weapons used to deliver the fatal blows. Both items were found shattered near his body, further emphasizing the ferocity of the attack. The crime scene told a story of chaos and brutality. Blood was found spattered in several areas of the apartment, highlighting the struggle that had likely taken place. The investigators noted stains on a cabinet in the living room, a jacket over the couch, the bathroom sink, a green towel, and a china cabinet in the hallway. The most blood, however, was concentrated in John's bedroom, where his body was ultimately found. Each detail pointed to a violent confrontation, yet the motives behind the attack remained a mystery. One peculiar clue stood out amidst the wreckage: a broken watch on John's wrist. The watch had stopped at approximately 2:15 a.m. on November 1, 1981, offering a possible timestamp for when the fatal assault had occurred. The watch became a focal point for the investigators, as it suggested a timeline for the crime and raised questions about what might have transpired in the early hours of that Sunday morning. This small but significant detail added to the eerie nature of the case, hinting at the calculated and violent nature of the act. As the investigation into John's demise unfolded, his sons provided police with critical information. They revealed that their father was a regular at a local bar called John's Place. A bartender from the establishment told the investigators that she had seen John there on the fateful night. She mentioned that he had been accompanied by a younger man that she did not recognize. The man was described as a white male, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a medium build, straggly, dirty blonde hair, and dark eyes. Despite this lead, the lack of concrete evidence hindered the case's progress. With no suspect identified, John's case went unsolved, eventually becoming a cold case. The case remained dormant for decades until 2018, when Griffith Police Detective John Mowery Jr. decided to re-examine it. This decision was deeply personal, as Detective Mowery's father had worked on the original investigation. While reviewing the crime scene photos, Detective Mowery noted inconsistencies that suggested John's movements after sustaining the fatal head wound were unlikely. This observation prompted him to revisit the forensic evidence, focusing on the blood swabs collected from the bathroom sink and other areas in the apartment. The blood samples were sent to the Indiana State Police Lab for DNA testing, but no matches were found in the National Criminal Database. Without a suspect already in the system, the investigation seemed to hit another end. Determined to push forward, Mowery sent the DNA samples to Parabon Nanolabs. Using databases from companies like 23andMe and Ancestry, Parabon searched for familial DNA matches that could lead to the perpetrator. In October 2022, Parabon made a breakthrough. They identified matches to 3 members of the same family. The investigators began ruling out potential suspects using additional evidence. A hair sample excluded one family member, while a cigarette butt collected from a traffic stop ruled out another. This process left only one individual, Gregory Thurston, who had been living in Eugene, Oregon since at least 2000. Thurston had prior interactions with the police in 2000 and 2013 related to a 1994 battery warrant in Indiana. However, both times, Indiana authorities declined to extradite him due to the distance involved. On October 24, 2024, Eugene police, acting on behalf of Indiana detectives, approached Thurston. Believing the visit was related to his old warrant, Thurston voluntarily cooperated. He was promptly arrested and charged with taking the life of John Blaylock. Investigators confirmed that Thurston matched the description provided by witnesses at John's place in 1981. At the time of the slaying, Thurston was between 20 and 23 years old, aligning with the bartender's account of the man seen with John on the night of November 1st. After 43 years, John's case was finally solved, bringing long-awaited closure to his family and community. The dedication of Detective Mowry Jr., combined with advancements in DNA technology, proved instrumental in identifying the suspect. Gregory Thurston is currently in custody at the Lake County Jail, awaiting trial for the crime that haunted Griffith, Indiana, for more than 4 decades. Dark secrets laid hidden behind the unsolved case of Mary Kathleen Schlais, a talented artist whose life was tragically cut short on a February day in 1974. A violent encounter with a man she barely knew left an enduring mystery for nearly 5 decades. Her untimely demise while hitchhiking to fulfill her artistic aspirations were finally solved after decades due to groundbreaking forensic advancements that finally uncovered the truth. Mary Kathleen Schlais was born on November 4, 1948, in Minneapolis, Hennepin County, Minnesota, to Arnold Benjamin Schlais and Louise Catherine Larson Schlais. As she grew up, she exhibited a vibrant personality and immense creativity. Her talents led her to pursue higher education at the University of Minnesota, where she graduated with distinction. A gifted artist and a skilled equestrian, Mary's life seemed promising and full of potential, admired by those who knew her for her artistic achievements and kind-hearted nature. On February 15, 1974, Mary's life took a tragic and unforeseen turn. At just 25 years old, she was found deceased near an intersection in the township of Spring Brook, Wisconsin. The discovery shocked her family and friends as they struggled to comprehend how her life could have been cut so short. Her demise was quickly ruled a slaying, a grim revelation that only deepened the heartbreak of those closest to her. The initial investigation revealed that Mary had been hitchhiking to an art show in Chicago on the day. This detail offered a narrow but significant lead in understanding the events leading to her untimely demise. However, progress in solving the case was hindered by the lack of witnesses or substantial evidence. Despite efforts by law enforcement, the case quickly grew cold. For decades, detectives from multiple law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to uncover the truth behind Mary's demise. They pursued numerous leads and tips, hoping to find a breakthrough in the case. Interviews were conducted with individuals who might have known something about the events surrounding her case. Despite these efforts, no viable suspects were ever identified. The lack of substantial evidence meant that the case remained stagnant, and justice for Mary seemed increasingly out of reach. Over the years, her case continued to draw attention from those determined to find answers. Law enforcement revisited the evidence periodically, employing new techniques as forensic technology advanced. Despite their best efforts, no breakthroughs were made until recent advancements in genetic genealogy provided a new avenue for investigation. Determined to seek justice, the Dunn County Sheriff's Office partnered with a team of genetic genealogists at Ramapo College in New Jersey. This collaboration focused on analyzing DNA evidence collected at the crime scene, including a critical piece of evidence, a hat left behind near Mary's body. In November 2024, the genetic analysis led investigators to an astonishing revelation. Using state-of-the-art forensic techniques, the team identified a suspect in the decades-old case, 84-year-old John Keith Miller. The breakthrough came when investigators uncovered a hair on the hat that had been left at the crime scene. DNA extracted from the hair matched Miller, conclusively tying him to the slaying. The hat, later confirmed to belong to Miller, became a pivotal piece of evidence in solving the mystery of Mary's tragic demise. Armed with this new evidence, the authorities tracked down Miller at his apartment in Owatonna, Minnesota. After years of uncertainty and unanswered questions, investigators finally had the opportunity to confront the man responsible for Mary's demise. During their interview with Miller, he confirmed his involvement in the 1974 slaying. His admission marked a crucial turning point in a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 5 decades. During his interview with authorities, Miller provided chilling details about the events leading up to Mary's end. According to the criminal complaint, Miller admitted to picking up the young hitchhiker as she made her way to an art show in Chicago. He then made unwanted advances, asking Mary for sexual contact. When she refused, his behavior escalated violently. In a moment of rage, he grabbed a knife from inside the car and fatally stabbed her in the back. The brutality of the attack left Mary with multiple stab wounds. Despite Miller's confession, a crucial piece of evidence, the weapon, has yet to be recovered. The absence of the weapon adds another layer of complexity to the case, though Miller's admission and the DNA evidence have provided law enforcement with enough to pursue charges against him. Miller faces a first-degree slaying charge for his role in the 1974 slaying of Mary Schlais. The suspect is currently being held in custody in Steele County, Minnesota, as legal proceedings begin. The authorities have taken steps to ensure his extradition to Dunn County, Wisconsin, where the crime was committed and where he will stand trial. For the investigators who tirelessly worked this case, Miller's arrest represents the culmination of years of dedication and perseverance. As Miller awaits extradition, Mary's family and the community that mourned her loss are one step closer to seeing justice served. Mary's family planned to hold their own press conference in the future, but they wanted to thank law enforcement for all their work. Hidden truths laid buried in the tragic story of Nancy Anderson, a bright and adventurous 19-year-old whose promising life came to a violent end in the paradise of Waikiki, Hawaii. A senseless slaying remained shrouded in silence for nearly 5 decades. The relentless investigation that spanned generations led to the groundbreaking discovery that reignited hope for justice in a case long thought to be lost to time. Nancy Anderson was born in 1953 in Bay City, Michigan, in the heart of a large family. As one of 10 siblings, her childhood was filled with the hustle and bustle of family life. Her father, Merle Anderson, worked at Dow Chemical to support their family until tragedy struck when he passed away in a workplace accident. This loss left an indelible mark on Nancy's family, but also shaped her determination to carve out her own path in life. Nancy attended Bangor John Glenn High School. She graduated in 1971, eager to explore the world beyond her hometown. With dreams of adventure and a strong desire to see new places, Nancy set her sights on Waikiki. Drawn to the allure of its beautiful landscapes and vibrant culture, she planned to spend time on the islands before pursuing her college education. To support herself in this new environment, Nancy took a job at a McDonald's. On January 7, 1972, Nancy's dreams of building a new life in Hawaii came to a sudden and tragic end. Just 2 months after moving to the picturesque island of Oahu, her life was violently taken. That afternoon, her roommate, 18-year-old Jody Spooner, woke from a nap to a horrifying scene that would forever alter both their lives. Nancy, only 19, was found stabbed to her end in the small apartment they shared. The events leading up to Nancy's demise began earlier that day, when 2 salesmen arrived at the apartment to demonstrate silverware. Nancy, always polite and accommodating, allowed them inside, even as her roommate, Jody, joined the demonstration when she returned home around 2:30 p.m. After the presentation, neither Nancy nor Jody made a purchase, and the salesman left. Jody, feeling tired, went to her room to nap, leaving Nancy alone in the apartment. The peaceful afternoon, however, would soon take a sinister turn. Jody awoke around 5 p.m. to an eerie and unsettling scene. She noticed water running in Nancy's bathroom, which struck her as odd since she believed Nancy had already left for her shift at McDonald's. When she went to check, the grim reality became apparent. Nancy's lifeless body was discovered in the bathroom, riddled with multiple stab wounds to her neck, chest, stomach, back, and sides. Her injuries also included defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought desperately against her attacker. When the authorities arrived, the investigation began in earnest. The crime scene was meticulously examined, yielding a significant amount of evidence. Bloody towels were recovered, and numerous fingerprints were lifted from the apartment. The sheer violence of the attack and the presence of defensive wounds painted a harrowing picture of Nancy's final moments. The salesmen who visited earlier that day were naturally among the first to be questioned. However, initial interviews yielded no concrete leads, leaving investigators struggling to connect the dots. The fingerprints and physical evidence provided some hope for future breakthroughs, but in the immediate aftermath, no arrests were made. When the police interviewed the roommate, Jody, about the events of the fateful day, she recalled hearing a strange noise around 4:15 p.m. while she was napping. Initially, she thought little of it since no further sounds followed. However, this detail would later take on a chilling significance as investigators worked to piece together the timeline of this case. The immediate suspects were the two silverware salesmen, Parker Graham and Jeffrey Allward, who had visited the apartment earlier that day. Both men cooperated fully with the investigation, providing fingerprints and taking polygraph tests, which cleared them of suspicion. The autopsy revealed the horrifying extent of Nancy's injuries. She had been stabbed a total of 60 times, resulting in 63 wounds, as 3 of the knife thrusts created exit wounds. The sheer brutality of the attack underscored the ferocity and intent of the perpetrator. Forensic experts determined that the weapon was likely a knife, with a blade approximately 10 millimeters wide and 60 millimeters long. Nancy went home for Christmas the previous year. Her sister Betty said later, "She acted a little strange. She thought something was going to happen to her. I think Nancy was afraid of something or someone." For decades, Nancy Anderson's case remained unsolved, a dark mystery frozen in time. Advances in forensic science offered some hope as the years passed, but the case lingered in the shadows, with no clear resolution. The investigators who had worked so diligently on the case retired, and new detectives inherited the cold file, determined to find answers. After nearly 50 years of silence, a breakthrough finally emerged in the form of advanced DNA technology. Parabon Nanolabs stepped in to assist with the case. Using cutting-edge techniques, they analyzed DNA evidence collected from the crime scene decades earlier. This approach had proven successful in solving other cold cases, offering a renewed sense of hope that justice for Nancy might finally be within reach. In 2021, nearly 5 decades after Nancy's life was taken, a significant breakthrough emerged in the cold case. Investigators obtained a DNA sample from the son of a retired Nevada prosecutor. The sample revealed a familial match to DNA found on a bloody towel at the crime scene. This pivotal discovery led law enforcement to Tudor Chirila, a 77-year-old attorney living in Reno, Nevada. Chirila's background added another layer of intrigue to the investigation. In the 1970s, he had lived in Honolulu, where he worked as a graduate assistant at the University of Hawaii. The university was located in close proximity to Nancy's Waikiki apartment, situating him near the crime scene. His later career was just as notable, as he had served as a deputy attorney general of Nevada and even ran for a position on the state Supreme Court. Additionally, he worked for the infamous Mustang Ranch brothel, further cementing his complex and controversial history. The breakthrough came when police were able to secure Chirila's DNA through his son, who resides in California. The familial match pointed directly to Chirila, finally giving them a tangible suspect after years of unanswered questions. With this evidence in hand, the authorities obtained a warrant to collect Chirila's DNA to confirm the match conclusively. Following the issuance of the warrant, Chirila was arrested in Reno on September 13, 2022, and charged with second-degree slaying. This development marked a seismic shift in the case, as the man who had evaded suspicion for nearly 50 years was finally brought under scrutiny. After his arrest, Jarila was extradited to Hawaii to stand trial for the crime. However, Jarila's legal team mounted a challenge to the extradition process. In December 2023, Jarila contested his transfer to Hawaii, arguing that his constitutional rights had been violated. Specifically, he claimed that the legal procedures surrounding his arrest and extradition were flawed, and that the case against him had been built on unconstitutional grounds. This legal battle over his extradition delayed the progress of the trial, and then, on December 25, 2023, he passed away in a hospital after refusing to eat, drink, or take medications for 2 days. The autopsy report showed sepsis caused by a urinary tract infection is what ended his life, but there were other contributing factors: tongue cancer, diabetes, a heart condition, and kidney stones. Nancy's brother Jack said, "Poetic justice. He spent the last year and a half of his life here behind bars, so I was at peace with that." Jack recently wrote a book about his sister's slaying and the long wait for answers called The Brittle Riddle, which is available in bookstores and on Amazon. He does not make any money off the sales. Rather, all the proceeds go to DNAjustice.org. The breakthrough DNA evidence and subsequent investigation finally revealed the truth behind Nancy's tragic demise, and in 2024, it was announced that the case is solved. Though Jarila was never convicted, Nancy's siblings see his demise in custody as vindication. Carol said, "If we do nothing else in our lives, I think I can say, Nancy, we did this for you. There has been justice for you." Two friends went missing while they were on their way to do a land appraisal near German County, Illinois. They disappeared without a trace, and the case went cold for about 48 years, until a car was spotted by fishermen in an Illinois river. In 1976, Everett Hawley was a 72-year-old man and a resident of Stockton, Illinois. Clarence Owens was 65 years old and lived in Freeport, Illinois. These two men were good friends and business partners in the field of real estate. Both were family men. Everett's wife's name was Atha, and the couple had one son. Clarence was divorced and a father of 3 sons. Everett was the former manager of the Federal Land Bank Association in Freeport. He was 6 feet 6 inches and weighed about 250 pounds. Clarence was about 5 feet 8 and 200 pounds. Most people in town still refer to Clarence by his childhood nickname Jum, short for Jumbo. He worked his entire life in real estate and land development. On February 19, 1976, the two men attended a late-morning political rally for gubernatorial candidate James R. Thompson in downtown Pecatonica. They had pie and coffee at a nearby cafe, stopped at a farm auction west of Byron in Ogle County, and were planning to do a land appraisal near German Valley in Stevenson County, but never showed up. They were spotted at the old Leo Borgman farm on Pecatonica Road between 2:30 and 3 p.m. Witnesses reported seeing the men there walking the grounds. Just before that, they stopped by Clarence's son's home in Pecatonica. His son Jim was not home. The men spoke briefly with Jim's wife, Donna. Clarence was driving that day in his gold 1966 Chevrolet Impala. For nearly 50 years, the car was never spotted. It was not resold or relicensed. The families of Clarence and Everett reported them missing the next morning on February 20th. Because both men were well known in the Pecatonica area and had no known enemies, the authorities initially believed they would return before long. When they failed to do so, a large search involving several police and fire agencies was conducted but turned up nothing. The only notable clue over the years has been the fact that there has been no activity in either men's bank account after they were last seen. There was at least one sighting of a gold sedan, and a pair of horn-rimmed glasses, similar to those worn by Clarence, were found alongside an area road. The car sighting did not check out. The lenses on the glasses found on the roadside did not match Clarence's prescription. 48 years later, on March 11, 2024, around 2:30 p.m., Crews used a crane to pull a 1966 Chevrolet Impala sedan from the Pecatonica River near the corner of East 1st and Washington Streets in Pecatonica. Fishermen spotted the vehicle at the bottom of the river using a sonar fish finder a few days earlier. The police quickly confirmed that it was the Impala owned by Clarence Owens by verifying its gold paint at a local body shop. When the car was pulled out of the river, authorities recovered more than 100 human bones belonging to 2 individuals. The bones included at least one femur and a temporal bone. The Winnebago County Sheriff's Office and the Winnebago County Coroner's officers were in the process of identifying the remains and launched a search for more bones. DNA extracted from the bones was compared with DNA profiles from the men's relatives to identify them. Before the DNA testing, the remains were examined by a forensic anthropologist in St. Louis, Missouri, who found no evidence of trauma. The investigators reported that various personal items were recovered from the Impala, items they hoped will help them identify the skeletal remains. In September 2024, DNA testing performed by the Illinois State Police Division of Forensic Services confirmed that the remains belonged to Clarence Owens and Everett Hawley that went missing in 1976. Winnebago County Sheriff Gary Caruana said in a statement, "This brings us one step closer to providing closure to the families of Clarence Owens and Everett Hawley, who have waited many years for answers that have been affected by this tragic case." Winnebago County Coroner Jennifer Muraski said that how the 2 men lost their lives is still unknown, but no foul play is suspected. Sheriff Caruana said, "This is a testament to the dedication and perseverance of our detectives and forensic experts. It is a reminder that no case is ever truly closed, no matter how much time has passed." In September 1997, officers responded to a burglary and brutal attack at a home in Kingsport, Tennessee. Upon arrival, the officers found James Hutson with multiple stab wounds, and he was pronounced deceased on the scene. They also found James's mom, Mary, who had been assaulted. DNA evidence was then collected. However, no match was found. Despite the investigators' efforts, the case remained unsolved and went cold until 27 years later, when the case finally had a breakthrough. Police officers responded to a call on September 6, 1997, at around 4:31 a.m. at a home in the 400 block of Rock Springs Road in Kingsport. The call came from the home across the street, as at the home where the crime took place, the burglar alarm had been disabled and the phone lines cut. At the scene, the Sullivan County Sheriff found 17-year-old James Hutson lifeless. He had been stabbed 24 times. They also found his mother, Mary Hutson. She had been assaulted by an unknown male in her bedroom. Mom and son was the only family members home that night. The other family members were all on a trip with friends. Mary was jarred awake when someone pulled a pillowcase over her head. The next moment, she heard a man's voice and felt him tugging at her shorts before he assaulted her. He then demanded money. She said there was none in the house and offered to give him jewelry instead. He shouted threats as she fumbled, with the pillowcase still over her head, for a ring. She could not find anything. The threats of harm continued as he led her downstairs to the front door, where he made her lay down. He told her she had better not move because he might be right outside the door. She asked him where her son James was, and he advised that he was tied up. The man slipped out of the house, and Mary ran through the house looking for James. She found him in the family room on the floor with several stab wounds and very bloody. Mary said that she never saw the man, but he had a southern accent. James was a student at Sullivan South High School. He enjoyed shooting pool, playing guitar, and listening to Jimi Hendrix's frenzied power chords and Bob Dylan's sagacious lyrics. He was a typical teen trying to find his way in the world. The notion of a career after graduation was still an abstract thought, but he had considered life in the military. The detectives processed the scene and collected all the evidence they could find. They submitted the evidence to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, crime lab for testing. A DNA profile for the suspect was developed and entered into CODIS in hopes that the man would be identified. However, there were no matches to a known individual, and despite extensive investigation efforts over the years, the case remained unsolved. Mary Hutson passed away a year after the 1997 crime due to lung cancer, despite being an avid runner who never smoked. In 2023, Sullivan County Sheriff's Office detectives reopened the case and began reviewing the evidence. Working with TBI agents as part of the TBI Cold Case Initiative, a decision was made to team with Othram in hopes that advanced DNA testing could help to identify the suspect in the case and to bring an end to a decades-long mystery. A potential suspect was identified as George Robinson, who was born on March 22, 1964. He was located in Kingsport, and the investigators obtained a DNA sample from him. The sample and additional evidence was sent to the TBI crime lab for further analysis. TBI forensic scientists directly compared Robinson's DNA with the DNA profile developed from evidence collected in 1997 and concluded it was a confirmed match. On November 20, 2024, a Sullivan County grand jury returned indictments charging George Robinson with slaying. When the deputies attempted to take Robinson into custody, he barricaded himself inside of his apartment. The Sullivan County SWAT team responded to Robinson's apartment, which is located along Hillview Drive in Kingsport, and attempted to negotiate with Robinson. Robinson refused to cooperate. After several hours, the SWAT team made entry into the apartment, at which point Robinson shot himself. He was transported to a local hospital for treatment. Robinson remains hospitalized. Family members of Mary and James spoke at a press conference. One of the family members said, "First of all, I just want to say thank you to all of you so much. These are happy tears, but these are also tears of missing my family. It has been really, really hard. 27 years is a long time, but it always feels like yesterday." No court date has yet been set for Robinson. A 78-year-old beloved and caring grandmother from Dallas, Texas, was brutally taken from this world in January 1989. There was significant DNA evidence collected and tested, but no match for decades, until a possible suspect was identified following testing from a private lab that created a DNA family tree. The perpetrator was right under their noses at the time of the slaying. This case was the first genetic genealogy DNA slaying trial in Dallas County. On January 19, 1989, Dallas police responded to reports of a demise at 411 North Francis Street. One of Mary Hague Kelly's relatives grew concerned that she might be sick or injured. When he went to check on her, he found her lifeless. Upon arrival, officials found Mary stuffed underneath her bed, naked from the waist down. She was pronounced deceased at the scene. The police said that there was no sign of forced entry, but Mary's purse, jewelry, antique phone, and 1980 Chevy Monte Carlo were stolen. Mary, a fragile older lady of 78 years old, weighing about 80 pounds, had been assaulted and strangled inside the Oak Cliff home. Her cause of demise was found to be strangulation. DNA samples were taken from Mary's body at the time, and an investigation was launched. The investigators interviewed several persons of interest and canvassed local pawn shops for Mary's stolen valuables, but to no avail. The investigation went cold, even after case information was sent to the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program in hopes of finding similar cases. In 2004, the investigators revisited evidence from the crime scene and recovered a suspect's DNA from Mary's body, but testing at the time yielded no results. In November 2021, the Dallas County District Attorney's Office enlisted the help of Othram, who used forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop a genealogical profile of the suspect. On June 28, 2022, genetic genealogy led to the half-brother of the man whose DNA was found on Mary's body. It turned out that he had lived next door to Mary at the time of her demise. The police tracked down the half-brother in question and then used a six-pack of beer that the suspect discarded to match his DNA to that which was found on Mary's body. On July 22, 2022, 3 decades after Mary's slaying, the Dallas Police Department announced the arrest of 53-year-old David Rojas. Rojas was charged with capital slaying and was held at the Dallas County Jail on $750,000 bond. At the time of Mary's brutal attack, Rojas was 20 years old. On November 7, 2024, Rojas was sentenced to life in prison without parole and was also accused of assaulting 2 of his own family members. After Judge Layla Lawrence Mays sentenced Rojas, victims, and family addressed him with personal statements. One of the 6 male jurors stayed to listen. He wept while hearing details from the 2 female family members Rojas was charged with assaulting when they were about 9 and 12 years old. One of his victims said aloud in her victim's statement that she is glad jurors found him guilty. She said, "What you did to me and my sister, especially my mom, what you did to women and children, you are a sick person. That will be the last time you lay your hands on a woman ever again in your life." A woman's life was brutally taken away and her body dumped in the woods of New Jersey. Her mother held out hope and wished every year that her perpetrator would someday be brought to justice. The investigators did not have much to go on, except for an eyewitness account and DNA found on the victim's body, which was not easily matched to a suspect, and the case went cold. Decades after her body was found, a suspect has been extradited from Canada to face slaying charges for the crime he committed. On the afternoon of November 4th, 1997, at around 4:30 p.m., the body of 23-year-old Tammy Tignor was found near a hiking trail off Gilbride Road in Bridgewater near Washington Valley Park. The 23-year-old had been strangled and her demise was ruled to be a slaying. Her body was found on the dirt access road that ended in a cul-de-sac by an ATV rider. The Bridgewater police and Somerset County investigators searched the woods for days, looking for any evidence or clues that could lead them to the perpetrator. But for years, the case remained unsolved. The last person who saw Tammy alive saw her get into an orange van at around 4 a.m. on November 4th. The van was also seen in Newark, a city that Tammy frequently visited. DNA evidence found on Tammy's body provided no answers. Her family, meanwhile, suffered the agony of losing their daughter while knowing the person responsible was walking free. Somerset County Assistant Prosecutor Mike McLaughlin said, "Tammy's mom called our office every year on November 4th, the anniversary of Tammy's demise, looking for an update. For years, investigators with the county's major crimes and cold case units, along with town police, continued to look into the mysterious slaying. 25 years later, in January 2023, evidence in the case was allowed to be resubmitted for DNA testing, which the prosecutor's office said may not have been possible in previous years. A few months later, in April, state police got a high stringency match based on resubmitted evidence for a possible suspect in the case. The suspect was identified as 60-year-old Robert Creeder. A first-degree slaying charge against Creeder was authorized in May 2023, but there was an issue. Creeder was born in Canada before he was adopted when he was young and moved to New Jersey. Creeder had since moved back to Winnipeg, Canada in 2002. Canadian court records show that Creeder was convicted of 1 count of assault and 2 counts of assault causing bodily harm in 2002. He was also convicted of disobeying a court order in 2010, along with 2 probation breaches. Creeder was transient and did not have a permanent address in Winnipeg. Investigators have also linked Creeder, who was working as a day laborer in Bridgewater, New Jersey when Tammy's body was found, to an orange van. After the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office worked with the U.S. Department of State, Creeder was taken into custody on June 27, 2024, by Canadian authorities based on the warrant for his arrest in New Jersey. On December 3, Creeder was extradited back to New Jersey and taken into custody in connection to the slaying nearly 3 decades ago. The investigators have not divulged a motive for Tammy's slaying, but that her demise was a purposeful slaying. Tammy and Creeder did not know each other. Somerset County Assistant Prosecutor Michael McLaughlin said, "It has been 27 years, 9,885 days since her body was found. I spoke with the victim's mother. I told her that we had arrested the man who took her daughter's life. It was incredibly emotional. She was very thankful to our detectives today and our detectives at the time." The prosecutors said that it was not a genealogical DNA finding made through a family member, but rather was a case where New Jersey State Police used new DNA testing to run the sample again and compare it to CODIS, which led to a match for Creeder. Young Tracy Whitney was at a Burger King with her friends and an ex-boyfriend. After getting into an argument, she decided to walk away. Little did she know this walk would lead to her end. Her brutal slaying in northwestern Washington left detectives lost for answers for decades. With no success and no leads, the case went cold until DNA evidence finally helped crack this cold case. On August 27, 1988, 18-year-old Tracy Whitney was at Burger King with some friends and an ex-boyfriend. While there, she had gotten into an argument and walked away from the Burger King in Federal Way. 13 hours later, Tracy's body was found by fishermen on a sandbar where the Stuck River and the Puyallup River meet, near the city of Sumner. The crime scene where her body was found was described as horrific. She was found nude. Her autopsy confirmed her cause of demise was asphyxia from strangulation and probable smothering. She was believed to have been beaten and assaulted, which additional autopsy findings supported. At the time of Tracy's demise, Pierce County detectives tried to develop leads as they searched for whomever was responsible in her end. They interviewed people who knew her and people who she had been romantically involved with. They also administered polygraph tests. Despite collecting DNA samples from her body that presumably belonged to the perpetrator, the investigators were unable to pinpoint a suspect. The case went cold and remained unsolved for years. In 2005, another effort to find the suspect by running those DNA samples through CODIS ultimately proved unsuccessful as no matches were found. It was not until 2022, owing to a grant from the Washington State Attorney General's office, that a Pierce County Sheriff's cold case detective submitted the DNA to a genetic genealogy laboratory for repeat testing. Law enforcement found a match to Tracy's perpetrator by way of a family member. Findings from the genealogy lab led detectives to the biological son of their suspect, who was identified as John Guillot Jr. of Puyallup. In December 2024, it was confirmed that Guillot was in fact a match for the DNA found on Tracy's body. Guillot passed away from cancer in January 2022. He had a strange history. His wife had taken her own life with a firearm. That case was investigated, and no foul play was suspected. In 2021, he had another demise in the family. His girlfriend, who was living with him, needed to be cared for. He was her caretaker. His son also lived in the house. They were negligent in taking care of her. The Pierce County Sheriff's Office said in a statement that there were no connections between Tracy and Guillot, and detectives believe this was a stranger abduction, assault, and slaying. Tracy's case had finally been solved. The Sheriff's Office said, "Our cold case unit is always looking into the past, trying to find answers for families just like Tracy's. We are glad they can finally have an answer and some closure with the solving of this case." Although Tracy's perpetrator could not be prosecuted, her relatives said that knowing he has been identified does bring them some sense of peace. Her sister, Robin Whitney, who was 11 years old at the time of Tracy's demise, said that she hopes identifying Guillot publicly helps solve other cold cases, as she believes he may have committed multiple crimes during his life. A repair shop worker and beloved family member and friend was violently assaulted in an Essex Street attack in February 2014 that left him a paraplegic. A decade after his attack, he passed away, and the investigators linked the 2014 attack to his demise. After a few years, the person responsible was finally arrested. On February 11, 2014, 36-year-old Stuart Coldicott sustained a massive head injury in Colchester, England, leaving him paralyzed and in need of complex daily care. After his accident, he was admitted to the hospital. Stuart's head injury was initially treated by medics as life-threatening. Their expertise helped Stuart's condition to improve, and he was subsequently discharged from the hospital. The police investigation started right after Stuart was attacked, focused on Barrack Street and Harsnet Road in Colchester. CCTV footage was examined, and a mobile police station was set up. At the time, the force ruled Stuart's injuries to have been the result of a serious assault, but they were unable to prove it. 10 years later, in March 2024, Stuart sadly lost his life. Stuart was known for always putting a smile on everyone's faces. He was described as a dearly loved brother, brother-in-law, uncle, great-uncle, son, and friend. His loved ones said that although he suffered this tragic fate, he never lost his naughty sense of humor. A forensic post-mortem examination identified a causal link between his head injury from February 11, 2014, and his demise. As a result, a fresh investigation was launched. During this investigation, a number of new lines of inquiry and fresh evidence have been uncovered. Essex police launched a slaying investigation after Stuart's demise. Detective Inspector Lydia George of the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Directorate said, "The injuries Stuart sustained had a significant and long-lasting impact on him and, of course, his family. When Stuart passed away and a causal link to the head injury was established, we began treating his demise as a slaying, and our fresh investigation was launched." On November 11, 2024, the force confirmed that a 61-year-old man was arrested in the city on suspicion of slaying following Stuart's demise. He has since been released on police bail until December. Stuart's family said, "Nobody could replace him, and he will always remain in our hearts. All the family members and friends will greatly miss Stevie very much, and our mischievous family member is gone from this world, but not from our hearts." A mother's life was taken in Austin, Texas. The case could have been solved immediately, as her daughters discovered evidence and there was a DNA match. But the case would turn cold until the perpetrator phoned the police and confessed. On May 9, 2019, 65-year-old Gloria Lofton was found slain in her bedroom at her home, east of downtown Austin in Texas. An autopsy found evidence that she may have been strangled, but the cause and manner of demise were listed as undetermined. Relatives, who said that the authorities provided few details, came to believe an alcohol-related accident may have been to blame. Gloria's family would hear no news from the detectives and understood that the case went cold and would remain unsolvable. 4 years later, in May 2023, 63-year-old Raul Mesa Jr. phoned the Austin police and confessed to assaulting and ending Gloria's life. He also admitted to taking 80-year-old Jesse Fraga's life. Jesse was a retired probation officer who was Mesa's caregiver and roommate. In 1982, Mesa took the life of an 8-year-old girl, Kendra Page, and served about a decade in prison before he was released under laws at the time that gave him credit for good behavior behind bars. Mesa's early release from prison in 1993 caused an uproar throughout Texas, and he was met by protesters at nearly every turn. Picketers drove him out of 6 cities, sometimes with threats of violence. Mesa said the following during an August 1993 news conference after he had been driven out of the communities. "In my heart, I know that I will not willfully bring harm to anyone." In 2023, the Austin Police Department acknowledged that it did not act on key forensic evidence that could have linked Mesa to Gloria's demise 4 years earlier. Christina Fultz, Gloria's daughter, said that the authorities appear to have missed another important clue That provided an even more direct and immediate link to Mesa. She and her sister found a mysterious note at Gloria's home 6 days after her body was discovered. The note, which has not previously been reported, identified Mesa by name. The note read, "I, Gloria Elizabeth Lofton, give permission to Raul Mesa Jr. to request a certificate of authority on my behalf for the purpose of..." And then the note ends. Christina said that they found the note after the police had searched the house and that neither she nor her sister turned it over to them. She had forgotten about it and recently found images of the document while searching her phone for a video that she shot of Gloria's home. Christina said, "It was there in front of us this whole time, and who knows how many slayings may have been prevented had they looked around a little bit further and a little bit harder." Mesa claimed that he was promised 25% of an inheritance that would go to Gloria's nephew and that he would be compensated for the slaying. Gloria's daughters have said that Gloria did not have nephews. They said that it was unclear whether another family member may have promised Mesa money. In 2020, a DNA profile was made from an assault kit, and it did match to Mesa at the time. In a statement, Interim Austin Police Chief Robin Henderson said that the department was deeply sorry about the oversight linked to the DNA report. No explanation for the error was provided. On September 30th, 2024, Mesa pleaded guilty in a deal that allows him to serve life in prison and avoid capital punishment over the objections of the victim's family members. Mesa pleaded guilty to capital slaying in Gloria's end and to slaying Jesse. Mesa will not be eligible for parole. Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza said in a statement, "Our hearts continue to break for the Lofton and Fraga families. We hope this outcome continues to help them with their healing process." As a result of this outcome, Mr. Mesa will spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole and will never threaten our community again. But the families of Mesa's victims wanted him to go to trial and for Attorney Garza to seek capital punishment. Gloria's daughter, Sonia Houston, said in a statement she read in court, "A lifetime in jail will not be equal to the pain the families have experienced. By accepting this plea, we are giving Raul exactly what he wants." In 1984, a man's life was ended after a fight with an intruder in Minnesota. DNA evidence would be stored until the advanced technology was able to identify the perpetrator almost 4 decades later. In the early morning of July 17th, 1984, the police responded to an apartment building on the 3200 block of Girard Avenue South in Minneapolis, Minnesota, after receiving multiple 911 calls. When the officers arrived, 2 women ran outside. A 33-year-old woman had a cut bleeding on the left side of her face. The second woman, 32 years old, was extremely distraught but uninjured. They told the police that an unknown man broke into their apartment and attacked them with a knife. Inside, the officers found Robert A. Miller's body lying in a pool of blood near a bedroom doorway. The officers observed blood on the kitchen floor, the back exit hallway, and the back exit doorknob as well. After tests, the outcome was that the blood did not match either victim. The investigators suspected that the perpetrator had cut himself during his knife attack. An autopsy later showed that Robert had been stabbed numerous times with wounds to his face, head, chest, back, and shoulders. No one was ever arrested or charged, and the case went cold. More than 3 decades later, in 2018, using the blood from the crime scene, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension was able to develop a DNA profile. Unfortunately, there were no hits in the DNA database, as the perpetrator was not in the nationwide criminal system. The breakthrough would come 5 years later. In March 2023, genealogical research identified 2 likely suspects, 2 brothers. The police collected a bottle from one brother's trash in 2021, and after DNA testing, eliminated him as a suspect. Then they retrieved a discarded cup of the remaining suspect and made a DNA match. The investigators were able to track down the suspect 67-year-old Matthew Brown, thanks to the advances in DNA technology. Brown, a father of two, worked as a security counselor at the Minnesota Offender Program in Moose Lake and ran a motel in nearby Cloquet for years. Most recently, he lived in Ingleside, Illinois. Jim Miller, Robert's brother, said the following after he received the news of the suspect's arrest. "It was like the day it happened. I fell apart. I lost my voice." He added, "There were a couple of calls over a course of time where they thought they had a lead, but then they fell through. I think about my brother all the time, but I never thought they would ever crack the case." He knows people who knew Brown and had no idea his brother's perpetrator was so close. Brown was extradited back to Minnesota and held on $1 million bond. He admitted to following a woman to her apartment after a bar closed, cutting through a window to get inside, running into a man, and running home covered in blood, saying to himself, "What have I done?" The police said that he told them it weighed on him for decades, and he always prayed it was not real. Despite this, Brown agreed that the evidence against him proved his guilt. The Miller family agreed to a plea deal to avoid a trial. On September 18, 2024, Brown pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for second-degree slaying. He received credit for 457 days of time served. Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman, lead investigator with the Minneapolis Police Department, said, "It feels good to finally bring a case together and give the family some sense of justice." David Miller, Robert's nephew, said, "It is hard for me to understand the mind of a person who carries a knife around with bad intentions. It is just hard for us to imagine. It has been hard on the family." Reflecting on the sentencing, Jim acknowledged that Brown could be released when he is 80 years old, but said, "That is fine. He will be an old man then." A young woman's life was cruelly taken in 1981 in Ohio. The perpetrator would be an immediate possible suspect, but he lied during his interview and walked free for 4 decades. The police would track him down through new DNA technology that was not available at the time, but then he would be arrested for a different crime, and then, suddenly, the case would be solved. On April 29, 1981, 18-year-old Deborah Lee Miller was beaten to her end with pots and pans and an oven grate in her apartment on West 3rd Street in Mansfield, Ohio. She was survived by 8 brothers and sisters and her parents, Shelva Jean Miller of Mansfield and Leroy Dale of California. She was due to graduate from high school in June 1981 and had been working part-time as a waitress at the local Mr. T's coffee shop. Deborah was one of several people from the Mansfield area whose suspicious demise in the 1980s were examined for possible links to Mansfield police officers. A special investigation ordered by the mayor concluded in 1989 that there was no evidence that linked any officers with the demises. Although, the report raised questions about involvement between police officers and slaying victim Deborah, and about the way the police investigated some slayings. The report noted that Deborah wrote in her diary that she was involved with several Mansfield police officers. The local police chief retired in January 1990 after subsequent complaints arose over alleged irregularities in the investigation of the passing of the ex-wife of a Mansfield patrolman. Deborah's case was reopened several times during the ensuing years, but without accurate DNA technology, the case would turn cold every time. Finally, 40 years after the crime, the case was reopened to account for advances in DNA technology and forensic investigative techniques. Mansfield Police Chief Jason Bauman said, "They examined the case as if it had happened yesterday, through an entirely new lens. Their findings were staggering." The chief said that a firm DNA profile of James Vanest, at the time Deborah's 26-year-old upstairs neighbor, emerged from evidence left from the room. Vanest had been questioned back in 1981, but was never identified as a prime suspect during the initial investigation, which became mired in allegations of the potential police misconduct. This time, Richland County prosecutor Jody Schumacher said that the DNA evidence against Van Nest was strong enough that her office was preparing a case against him for the slaying to take to a grand jury. In November 2021, the police had found Van Nest living in Canton, Ohio, about 100 miles east of Mansfield, and re-interviewed him. He had admitted to lying to investigators during his first interview in 1981, and the investigators sensed this time that he was trying to create an alibi to account for his DNA being present in Deborah's apartment. Van Nest was trying to claim that he had previously been in Deborah's apartment as a way of explaining the presence of his DNA, even though the police had not revealed their DNA findings to him. Mansfield Police Detective Terry Butler sought a second interview in spring 2024, but Van Nest refused to speak and requested an attorney. The authorities said that he subsequently sold his house in Canton, bought a pickup truck and trailer, and fled to West Virginia. He left several firearms at his Canton home and was stopped in West Virginia with 2 more. He was arrested on state charges and released on bond. The Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives took over his case and later indicted him on the federal gun charges. On November 18, 2024, U.S. Marshals and Canton's SWAT team attempted to serve Van Nest with that indictment at a hotel where he was holed up. Chief Baumann said, "It is our understanding that when confronted by marshals and the Canton Regional SWAT team, Mr. Van Nest pointed a gun at them and barricaded himself inside the hotel. After a short shootout, one Canton SWAT member was shot in the arm and Mr. Van Nest was fatally shot." The officer who was shot, Patrick Lewis with the North Canton Police Department, said the following after the incident. "After about 30 seconds to a minute of trying to find him, I heard a gunshot and felt instant pain in my right arm. The situation was so chaotic. There was still gunfire, so when I saw the bleeding coming from my arm, I knew I had to get a tourniquet on." The chief said that the department considers the 43-year-old cold case as closed and hopes identifying Deborah's perpetrator will bring her family some closure. Detective Butler said that his great-uncle was one of the first officers on the crime scene of Deborah. He said that he feels fortunate to get the chance to solve a slaying case that happened when he was just 10 years old. "People should know," he said. "We do not give up. We keep digging." Chief Baumann said the following at the press conference on December 30th. "As law enforcement officers, you always want to see the handcuffs on the bad guy. That is what we do for a living. But I can tell you, seeing the family with a little bit of relief and closure certainly supersedes our need." He added that Deborah's family is grateful that this case has finally been resolved. A confinement officer who owned a Subway store in Indiana in 1998 would lose his life in his store. DNA technology, jail interviews, and jail phone recordings would lead to a serial perpetrator 2 decades later. On April 23, 1998, at a Subway store in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a man walked into the store, pointed a gun at a woman, and began yelling, asking if anyone else was in the store. She then told him that the owner, Daniel Osborn, was in the back, and then the man went to find him. Daniel, an Allen County Jail confinement officer, was in his Allen County Sheriff's Department uniform and on the phone with his wife, who is the co-owner of the Subway store. The man demanded that Daniel get off the phone and then shot him before demanding money from the cash register and safe. After he got the money, he bound the woman's hands with duct tape. He spoke to her once again and left immediately after. He said, "You better call the 50 for him. He needs help." 47-year-old Daniel unfortunately passed away. When the detectives reached the crime scene, they collected evidence and fingerprints, but unfortunately the case went cold. After 2 decades, the case was reopened and they found a DNA match to a suspect. Cold case detective Brian Martin then interviewed individuals at the Department of Corrections. They shared some information that they had gained from 48-year-old Bernard McClaney that ultimately led to his arrest. Detective Martin said, "We were able to get Bernard McClaney to give very vital key pieces of this crime to us. that only somebody who had intimate knowledge would know. McClaney's phone calls from Pendleton were monitored. In one phone interview, McClaney told his sister that he was conflicted for telling on himself, and that he was afraid he made a mistake in doing so. McClaney told his sister, "I feel that there is a lot of inside information going on, like they know what is going on, like they know I ended the life of the officer or something. I do not know if it is me being paranoid or whatever it be." In another phone call, McClaney's sister tells him she wants him to be at peace, but he replied that he is very conflicted. "It was wrong, them things I done. The motive was robbery, and I am very sorry for it." Shell casings found at the scene were consistent with a .380 caliber weapon McClaney used in a different case. Daniel's life was taken in between two other slayings McClaney have admitted guilt in. He previously confessed to ending the life of 22-year-old Kemrick Drake on April 27th in Columbus, Ohio, and 19-year-old Artie Rittenhouse on April 1st in Fort Wayne, both in 1998. McClaney pleaded guilty to aggravated robbery and voluntary manslaughter in the case involving Kemrick more than 2 decades ago. He has served his sentence in that case. McClaney pleaded guilty to slaying in Artie's demise in 2013 and was sentenced to 55 years in prison for the crime. Court records show that he was recommended for a maximum security facility. More than a dozen members of the Allen County Sheriff's Department were in the courtroom during sentencing to support Daniel's family. On August 9th, 2024, McClaney accepted a plea deal, then pleaded guilty, and on August 22nd, he was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Detective Martin believes that McClaney got a fright when he saw Daniel with his confinement officer uniform on, and that is why he started shooting. Martin called it possibly an armed robbery gone wrong. McClaney apologized to his victim's family during the hearing. He said, "Just know that he is up in heaven. He was a good guy. He is up in heaven. He is looking down on you." The defendant said that he hopes Daniel's family can someday forgive him, but he understands if that is not possible. "I do not forgive myself." Allen County Prosecutor's Office Chief Counsel Tisa Helga, who was assigned to the case, said she was happy to see Daniel's family get some closure with the plea agreement and sentence. She said, "A lot of time in slaying cases, we do not get the offender saying, 'I am really sorry, I regret this, I have suffered with this,' but we did hear that this morning." Chris Cuffle, Daniel's eldest daughter, and Emily her best, his eldest granddaughter, spoke on behalf of the family at the hearing, each representing a generation impacted by his demise. They said that they were glad McClaney accepted the plea offer so that they could avoid a lengthy trial. Chris, describing her father as kind, loving, and a protector, said, "To know him was to love him. In the more than 20 years since Daniel's life ended, he has missed out on major life events and playing a role in his loved ones' lives." In court, Chris said, "Mr. McClaney not only robbed our family's subway, but robbed so many loved ones of a father, husband, grandfather, brother, and friend." Emily said that she wishes she had memories of her grandfather, but unfortunately, all she has are stories she has heard. She said, "Hearing all my life how involved he was as a grandpa and how much he loved us, I know he would have adored his other granddaughters and great-granddaughters." With children of her own, Emily said that she takes her 5- and 3-year-old daughters to visit their great-grandfather's grave. She has had to explain to them why their great-grandpa is in the ground, what bad guys are, and what demise is. She said, "I now sympathize with my aunt and my mom when they had to explain to my cousin and I at such a young age what heaven was." A woman would lose her life due to strangulation in Massachusetts. Forensic genetic genealogy brought the breakthrough after almost 2 decades. In October 2005, 42-year-old mother of 4, Suzanna Alvarado's body was found on the side of Route 88 in Westport, Massachusetts. An autopsy was performed where it was determined that Suzanna, a resident of nearby New Bedford, had been beaten and strangled. Her demise was ruled as a slaying. She had a final encounter with law enforcement on October 14th, when she was arrested by New Bedford police on a charge of public drunkenness and prostitution. Her husband, Alex Sanchez Alvarado, said, "That is not the full story of her. She was not just some prostitute. She was a good person with problems, you know? Yeah, she had a record. She liked illegal substances. It was an escape. But one thing about her, she was not phony." Relatives quoted in that story noted that she had suffered physical abuse as a child. Evidence from the crime scene was collected, and an STR profile was developed using traditional DNA testing. This profile was entered into CODIS, but there was no match to a known individual. The person responsible for ending Suzanna's life was not known, and despite the detectives following up on all available leads, the case went cold. In 2020, 15 years after the crime took place, the Massachusetts State Police Unresolved Case Unit performed a forensic review of the case in hopes that advances in forensic DNA testing could assist in the identification of the person responsible. In 2022, the Bristol County District Attorney's Office and Massachusetts State Police Unresolved Case Unit teamed with Otherum to determine if advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy could help generate new leads. The Bristol District Attorney's Office secured funding from Season of Justice and submitted evidence to Otherum. Otherum provided new investigative leads to law enforcement, and a follow-up investigation was conducted. This led investigators to potential relatives of the suspect, a man who left DNA evidence at the crime scene in 2005. After nearly 2 decades, on December 18, 2024, 62-year-old Simão Farias was arrested and arraigned. He is being held without bail, and Suzanna's family is waiting for justice to be served. In the Bronx, in New York, on New Year's Eve in 2006, the tragic demise of a professional welterweight boxer broke the hearts of his family, friends, and the community. The person responsible was able to evade the police for 18 years, until one day when he was caught and brought to justice. Kemal Kolenovic was a boxer that loved the fighting life even though the pay and benefits were not always great. At the age of 28, his 9 years career record was fairly unremarkable with 10 victories, 6 losses, and 2 draws. According to a friend, Kemal was an all-out brawler, not much of a technical boxer, but he always had a blast just throwing punches, and he was good at it. His friend also said that it was hard for him to get fights with his style. He made his opponents look stupid. On December 31st, 2006, Kemal lost his life after a barroom brawl in which the police said he had not participated. Sometime after 4:30 a.m., he was run over by a man driving a sports utility vehicle. The man was fleeing the Moonlight restaurant and bar on Belmont Avenue, where he and others had argued over which Albanian surnames were most associated with tougher and generally superior people. The men had taken the fight outside. Kemal, who was at the Moonlight with an uncle, Tony Mujovic, had eventually followed them onto the sidewalk and joined a group that had gathered perhaps just to see what was going on, or perhaps to try to get them to break it up. One of the men climbed into a dark sport utility vehicle and plowed into the crowd. He hit Kemal with his car. That threw Kemal headfirst into a tree and fled the scene and disappeared to the Balkans in Eastern Europe. The EMS responded and took him to St. Barnabas Hospital, where he was pronounced deceased shortly after. On the surveillance footage that was recovered from the scene, Kemal can be seen with his hand in his pockets, wanting to go home. His back was towards the Mitsubishi SUV. He did not stand a chance, as he did not see the car coming. The case into Kemal's slaying went cold, as the man responsible for Kemal's demise could not be found for 18 years. Early in 2024, the Bronx DA's office issued an international red notice arrest warrant, and U.S. Marshals joined forces with local law enforcement in Kosovo, Serbia, to finally apprehend 42-year-old Ahmet Gashi. Gashi was then picked up by the Serbian police and was transferred to the ward of the U.S. Marshals. The police identified Gashi as a suspect within days of the slaying. On December 13, 2024, he arrived at Central Booking in the Bronx. He was charged with second-degree slaying. Kemal's best friend, Elvir Murici, hopes the arrest of the suspect after 18 years will bring some solace to the victim's family. He said, "When they hear the news, I am sure they will be relieved a little bit. They are not bringing nothing back, to be honest, but at the same time, it will make them feel better." For nearly 5 decades, a notorious slaying case has plagued Australian detectives until the perpetrator was finally arrested. On January 13th, 1977, best friends Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett from Collingwood, Victoria, were found lifeless in their home on Easy Street in Melbourne, Australia. Suzanne had been stabbed 27 times and was also assaulted. Her then 16-month-old son was left unharmed and had been unattended in his cot when the police located their bodies. Susan was found face down near the front door with 55 stab wounds and showed signs of self-defense and attempts to escape. The bathtub and towels near the back of the house showed evidence that the perpetrator had attempted to clean up before leaving via the back door. There were no signs of forced entry, though a footprint on the front windowsill indicated a possible entry point. The kitchen light was left on, and the weapon was not found. The two friends were last seen alive on the evening of January 10th. DNA was collected from the scene and stored, but the case, dubbed the Easy Street slayings, unfortunately went cold. 40 years later, in 2017, Victoria Police had offered a $1 million reward to solve the double slaying case after a re-investigation of the case. Suzanne's sister, Gail Armstrong, said that the reward was well overdue. She said, "The reward would bring relief. It is half a lifetime we have lost. Here is $1 million. Just say something." There was a person of interest in the case, and he agreed to provide a DNA sample. But then he fled the country, and the police were not able to find him. A DNA test on a family member then matched him to samples taken from the crime scene of the brutal slaying of Suzanne and Susan. The case went cold again, as he could not be located. The breakthrough finally came 7 years later. The detectives found out that accused double perpetrator and offender, 65-year-old Perry Kouroumblis, had been living in Greece since 2017. Kouroumblis could not be arrested while he was in Greece, due to the country's 20-year statute of limitation on initiating slaying charges. So, undercover officers lured him to Rome. In late November 2024, 3 of Victoria's most senior detectives landed in the Italian capital 16,000 kilometers from where the crimes took place in 1977. The historic, majestic, and famous city of Rome would be the last place the Victoria Police would have thought their biggest breakthrough would happen in possibly their state's most infamous, baffling, and brutal cold case slaying. After the breakthrough arrest, Victorian Police Commissioner Shane Patton described the case as an absolutely gruesome, horrific, frenzied slaying. He said, "For over 47 years, detectives from the squad have worked tirelessly to determine who was responsible for taking the lives of Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett. This was a crime that struck at the heart of our community, 2 women in their own home, where they should have felt their safest." Patton also recognized the enduring resilience of both the Armstrong and Bartlett families, who have grieved for over 4 decades, and no doubt this will be a very emotional time for them. The Kouroumblis family lived on Bendigo Street, less than 300 meters away from the house where the 2 women were slain. Kouroumblis was 17 years old at the time and was a student at the same school where Susan worked as an arts and crafts teacher. In the weeks after the slayings, Kouroumblis was stopped by Ron Iddles, who was then a junior police officer, but went on to be one of the most respected detectives in Victoria police history. Kouroumblis was said to have an alibi for the day the women lost their lives. On December 2nd, 2024, Kouroumblis boarded a commercial Qatar Airways flight from Rome to Doha. He was the first to board the Boeing 787 and was seated at the back of the aircraft. There were 2 detectives seated next to him, and in front of him sat the boss of Victoria's detective squad, Dean Thomas. When the plane touched down, everyone on board exited the aircraft, but Kurrumblis was the last to get off. He was kept in a holding cell before boarding the 13-and-a-half-hour flight to Melbourne. When the plane finally landed in Melbourne, Kurrumblis was, this time, the first to exit, flanked by the officers. He was then formally questioned over the alleged slayings of best friends, Suzanne and Susan. Kurrumblis will formally be charged with 2 counts of slaying and 1 count of assault during his next court appearance. Suzanne's sister Gail has spent every day waiting for news of the arrest. She said, "I just thought one day. One day. The police were so persistently consistent, I knew that it would happen one day." More than 44 years after a nursing student was slain in her trailer home in central Kansas, a person close to home was sentenced for ending her life. In 1980, Mary Robin Walter was a 23-year-old mother, wife, and a nursing school student. On January 24th, she was shot multiple times in her Great Bend trailer home in Kansas, and her body was found by her husband. The police found a .22 caliber handgun at the scene and confirmed that it was the weapon that was used to end Mary's life. Mary's 25-year-old neighbor was a suspect early on in the case, but the case went cold just 2 years into the investigation when the detectives failed to find any evidence to tie him to the case. The case remained untouched until more than 4 decades later in 2022, when a detective persuaded Barton County Sheriff Brian Bellendier to reopen the case and use new technology and techniques that were not available at the time. The detectives re-interviewed the initial suspect, Stephen L. Hanks, who by that time had spent a decade in prison for assault, battery, robbery, and burglary. He finally admitted to ending the life of Mary, but the authorities did not reveal his motive. Mary's daughter, Pamela Walter Cooper, said that although there was finally an arrest, she does not feel any different. She already forgave the suspect years ago. She said, "I already knew who did it. I knew that he was not convicted of it, but we knew who did it. We knew it was Stephen Hanks, the neighbor." Hanks formally pleaded guilty in August 2024 as part of a plea agreement that called for a sentence of not less than 5 years and not more than 25 years. The district court judge, however, raised the minimum to 10 years during the sentencing hearing. On September 12, 2024, 70-year-old Hanks got his sentence of 10 to 25 years in prison for second-degree slaying. The sheriff said that they believe it is the oldest cold case in Kansas to be solved and result in a conviction. Sheriff Bellendier said, "It bothers me that many of the people who were so affected by this tragic crime have since passed away prior to bringing the suspect to justice. I consider myself fortunate that I had the resources and the diligent personnel to close this case. The credit for solving this slaying goes to the dedicated officers that had the tenacity to bring it to a conviction." Pamela, Mary's daughter, said, "I think my dad would be relieved. I just hope that he, Hanks, is sorry for what he has done, that he is remorseful." In 2017, a beloved father and restaurant owner lost his life one night while he was at his restaurant in Pennsylvania. The person responsible managed to evade justice for 6 years before enough evidence could be gathered against him, and he was prosecuted. 58-year-old Robert Barron Sr., the owner of Gigerelli's Pizza in Old Forge, Pennsylvania, was last seen at around 10:30 p.m. on January 25, 2017, after he took his son Robert Barron Jr. home from work and then returned to the restaurant on South Main Street. The next day, it was apparent that a violent assault took place at his restaurant, and he was reported as missing. The police responded to the restaurant where they found evidence from what they believed to be a brutal attack. There was spattered blood, broken glass, and a human tooth in the utility sink. They also found a looted cash register, an empty safe, and signs that someone tried to clean the place up. 2 days later, Robert's car was located in the 100 block of Howard Street, with DNA on the steering wheel belonging to Robert and another male. There was not enough DNA collected in the sample to identify who the other man was. During an interview with Robert Jr., the police asked him if he knew of anyone who would want to hurt his father, and he immediately said Justin Schuback. Robert Jr. and Justin were friends, and Justin was an illegal substance user who knew Robert Sr. had large sums of cash in his restaurant. The police went to Justin's home, where he denied knowing anything about Robert's disappearance. The investigators searched several properties, including Justin's auto and towing company, owned by Justin's first cousin. The investigators also learned that Justin owed money to his illegal substance dealer. However, shortly after midnight on January 26, 2017, Justin allegedly paid his illegal substance debt in full and bought another 11 bags of substances for $180. As the police pressed on, suspicion of Justin grew. His girlfriend at the time, Courtney Rake, told them he left the house on January 25, 2017, between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. He did not answer calls and text messages for hours and only returned home, out of breath, with shoes covered in mud, around 3 a.m. Justin told Courtney that he had been hiding out from the police because he had substances on him. He cleaned himself up, took the substances, and went to bed. The police continued to investigate the case, but could not find the body or evidence leading to a suspect. The case had little movement until 6 years later, in March 2023. Advancements in forensics and cell tower analysis helped break the case and provide a timeline of Justin's movements the day Robert went missing. Justin Schuback's phone records showed that he was at Gigerelli restaurant between 12:39 a.m. and 1:45 a.m. He headed south at 1:56 a.m. and was then pinged at Pagnotti Park between 2:01 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. The data helped lead the police to discovering Robert Sr.'s remains at Pagnotti Park. The range to tower information also showed Schuback's phone around Connell Street, where a witness first saw Robert's Hyundai, and then on Howard Street, where the authorities ultimately found the vehicle. Those findings led to Schuback's arrest, and during his questioning, investigators pressed him for a confession. Schuback, however, repeatedly denied that he ended Robert's life. About a half hour into the interview, Schuback said that he wanted a lawyer, but the questioning continued anyway. Schuback had a different story for his cellmate in the Lackawanna County Prison. His cellmate gave him some Suboxone, a buprenorphine and naloxone cocktail meant to ease opioid withdrawal symptoms. The detectives claimed that it was done to interrogate Schuback while he was under the influence. Schuback said, I did it." According to court filings, Schuback disclosed that he planned to burglarize the restaurant and steal money. He did not anticipate that Robert Sr. would be there, and the two got into an argument that escalated. Schuback said that he racked Robert with a metal object and he fell lifeless on the ground. He then cleaned the restaurant and drove Robert's body to a park to dispose of the remains. He gathered incriminating evidence into bags and a suitcase and burned it outside of the county. The trial began May 6, 2024. The prosecution rested the following Monday on May 13th. Schuback did not take the stand, and no defense witnesses were called. Jurors found Schuback guilty after deliberating for about 10 hours over 2 days. His first-degree slaying conviction carries an automatic life sentence, but Judge Terrence Nealon needed to hand down separate sentences for the burglary and robbery charges. Schuback was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus a consecutive sentence of 7.5 to 15 years in prison for robbery and burglary. 11 days later, on May 24th, a wrongful demise civil suit was filed in county court by Robert's daughter, Brittany Barron, acting as administrator of his estate without an attorney. The suit asks for liens to be placed on 2 properties owned by Schuback to prevent them from being transferred or sold before the suit is adjudicated. His home at 3 Foundry Street, Old Forge, and 1.09 acres of land on Miller Street in the borough. County property and deed records appear to indicate that the properties are one and the same. A single-family home on 1.09 acres, which was transferred to Schuback by his mother in 2021, the summer before she passed away. That home is a short distance from Pagnati Park and the densely wooded area where Robert's skeletal remains were discovered in early 2023. It is also where 38-year-old Schubach was arrested in March of that year. District Attorney Powell stated in a press conference that no one in law enforcement ever gave up trying to solve this mystery. They sincerely hope that the Barron family can begin to start to move forward and find some relief and closure. He went on to commend the efforts of all of the investigative teams, including the FBI, Old Forge detectives, and the Pennsylvania State Police. In 1976, Pauline Brazeau, a single mother, was last seen leaving a restaurant in Calgary, Canada. Her body was found soon after, but the case would only be solved after almost 4 decades. 16-year-old Pauline Elizabeth Brazeau was a young Métis woman who moved to Calgary, Canada from Yorkton, Saskatchewan, with her older sister, Nancy. Pauline grew up in a small house in Yorkton with 8 other people, her parents, her siblings, and 2 cousins her parents took in when her aunt passed away. She was also a single mother to a little girl. On January 8, 1976, Pauline was having drinks at her aunt's apartment in Calgary's West End. She left to get pizza with a friend. After finishing up, they took off, but Pauline could not find her gloves. She tried to retrace her steps, headed back to the pizza place, turned up nothing, and left again. About 5 hours later, she was found partially clothed with multiple stab wounds on a forestry road outside of Calgary. An autopsy would determine that her life was taken. According to Nancy, Pauline's sister, Pauline was outgoing, friendly, and just a normal kid. Her cousin Roy said that she was stunning. He said, "She was a beautiful girl. Boy, oh, she was a wonderful-looking girl." Due to the lack of advanced DNA technology, the case went cold. Her case stayed cold until 45 years later. In 2021, Alberta RCMP's Historical Slaying Unit partnered with Calgary Police Service's Cold Case Slaying Unit to reanalyze files. Dating back to the 1970s, with advancements in DNA technology, investigative genetic genealogy was used to identify leads. The next year, in 2022, the Historical Slaying Unit sought aid from Othram, and then worked with 2 dedicated genealogists from Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy, coming up with a suspect in 2023. On November 7th, 74-year-old Ronald James Edwards of Alberta, Canada was arrested and charged with non-capital slaying as defined by the criminal code at the time. The RCMP does not believe that Pauline knew Edwards, and he is not being linked to any other slayings of the era. Edwards has a criminal history. In 1989, he pleaded guilty to attempted slaying and assault of an 18-year-old woman. According to news stories written by the Calgary Herald and the Canadian Press at the time, Edwards attacked the young woman with a knife. The judge who sentenced him to 10 years in prison commented that the victim likely saved her own life by escaping through a window at the time. The arrest came about 20 years since Pauline's father last heard from an officer about his daughter's case. Pauline's mother has passed away since, but neither her father nor her sister is disappointed in the police work. They know a lot of time has passed, and they believe that the police did everything they could at the time. The officer in charge, Inspector Brian Brown, said that the Alberta RCMP Historical Slaying Unit investigators are committed to speaking for those who cannot speak for themselves, and that the search for Pauline's perpetrator has never ended over the past 47 years. Throughout the years, they remained hopeful that the person responsible would one day be held accountable. Inspector Brienne said that she is extremely grateful for all investigators who have worked on this investigation throughout the years, and the partnership and support from the Calgary Police Service. Edwards made his initial court appearance in Calgary on November 14th, although he was not physically present in the courtroom. He is set to appear before a judge and jury on March 3rd, 2025. A man was found deceased inside his home in Oklahoma, but the police only made an arrest nearly 20 years later. On July 17, 2006, Ervin Dwight Tolon was found with a fatal gunshot wound inside his home near North St. Louis Avenue and Virgin in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The police found illegal substances at the scene and believed that may have been the motive for the slaying. The detectives interviewed the neighbors, followed up on leads, and collected evidence. But despite all efforts, the case turned cold. 18 years later, in 2024, the case was reopened. In November and December, the detectives talked with several witnesses and received new information that identified Bryant Gamble as a suspect in the case. On December 10, 2024, he was arrested for first-degree slaying and was booked into the Tulsa County Jail. Gamble was previously released from prison in February 2024 after serving more than 16 years for a 2007 robbery conviction. In 1988, an assault took place in northern Arizona. The arrest would only happen decades later. Thanks to the advancements in DNA technology, this case has seen the light at the end of the tunnel. On December 16, 1988, a woman was working as a clerk at a gas station in Pinetop, Arizona, when a man forced her into a vehicle and took her to a remote area of Lakeside. The man then violently assaulted her and left her in the woods. The woman was able to find a nearby home and she called 911. A lot of work was done in the 80s, but they were limited by the technology back then. DNA evidence could be tested in 1988, but the sample had to be much larger than today. Pinetop Lakeside Police said that the case had been reviewed several times through the years, but had no solid leads and unfortunately went cold. However, 33 years after the crime happened, in 2024, recent advancements in DNA testing helped identify the suspect in this case as Thomas Duke. The lucky break in the case happened because the evidence collection was done so well in 1988. Duke was not previously on the investigators' radar for this crime. Duke was arrested while at his job in Maricopa County. He was extradited to Navajo County, where a grand jury indicted him on charges of kidnapping, assault, and abuse. The Navajo County Attorney's Office is pursuing a criminal prosecution of Duke. He had previously served just over 6 years in an Arizona prison in the late 70s and early 80s for 2 assaults and an attempted assault. The investigators are building a case against him to get closure for the victims. Detective Bunch said that he was relieved to get a break in the case, a feeling he says was also felt by the victim. He said, "I think it was a pretty big surprise when I contacted her, but, hopefully now that she knows who did this, and it is going to go through the court process, which unfortunately can take a while, she can get some closure at the end of it."